Hello and welcome to another episode of Spiritually Incorrect. I'm your host, Seth Hart. Joined with me is Jonathan Lionheart.
Hey,
You doing okay?
hasn't been the best couple of weeks. I'll be yeah.
Yeah, you didn't say howdy. I'm a little shocked.
No, things are pretty dark. Right? I mean, I don't know. I wasn't gonna. I've kind of tried to hold my tongue, but like, how can I when darkness is literally descending upon the land? I mean,
Oh,
how
gosh.
can I when rural communities think that this is what they need, but it's salt of the earth families that like are ultimately hurt the most by this? I mean, how can I stay quiet when I can barely sleep and my kids can't either? I mean, I'm just gonna say it. Daylight savings time is evil, and
I knew this couldn't have been like, oh, give me a break. Really? We just did 2 episodes. Okay.
Daylight savings time has my kids have woken me up at 4:30 a.m. every single day this week.
Yep.
Every single day.
And
Seth.
yep.
Oh my
And
gosh.
we have a 9-month-old and they don't adjust well either. So, yep, he's going to bed earlier and we're trying to force him to stay up. I
Evil
don't.
times. Evil times.
Maybe Congress, they've talked about this for a long time. Maybe they'll finally get rid of it. I don't understand why anyone still wants this. I used
Yeah.
to live in Arizona for a year, and from a lot of Arizona, it doesn't have daylight savings, and it was so amazing. It
Yeah.
was so amazing. But there's little parts of it that do, and I just don't get it. I really don't get why we keep this around.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, is time even real? It's a social construct. I don't know. We should
You,
just get rid of the
mm,
concept of time.
yeah.
You know,
All right,
just
now
go
you're
with
just
the
getting
flow.
extreme.
Just
Oh,
well, this is very new agey. That time isn't real. Only the present now, the eternal now. Seth, I'm merely prefacing what is to come in today's discussion.
oh gosh, yeah. So what are we talking about today, John?
Well, we've got the new age, spiritual but not religious.
The new
Woohoo!
age, and as I'll clarify,
The newer
it's
age.
the newest age. Yeah, the new age is definitely something that by the 2000s had kind of died away. It was more of a 70s, 80s movement. Maybe you can put into the late 60s, but that's it. That's something your parents had to deal with, but not something that necessarily fits well with today. But the spiritual but not religious is
Yay! The newer new age. So it
yeah,
was the age of Aquarius. What age are we in now?
still an
Uh,
Aquarius.
Still in
Yeah,
Aquarius.
yeah, we'll be in Aquarius for a long, long time, apparently. Quite a while, a lot of spiritual evolution to do in that meantime.
Well, hopefully we can help usher in a new state of cosmic consciousness through this one episode and solve everything
Ooh.
and raise humanity's vibrations to the next level and usher in the next age.
You're about to be enlightened. I just want to say, through these two gurus.
We're not going to enlighten you. We're going to reveal that you already are
Oh,
enlightened
man. Oh, man.
and you just need to realize it.
And the funny thing is it sounds like if we're just sort of parroting this, no, this is actually like 100% a lot of the teachings that are in it.
Oh,
But
and
we
it's fascinating. I'm excited to talk about it. So,
absolutely do. We have an expert here to talk about it.
no, we
Ha!
couldn't find anyone who knows what they're talking about, so we got you, Seth. You're kind of hosting this. So
As I
yeah,
play with my little bookmark. Yep. So might as well jump right into it. What do I mean? What are we talking about today? What do I mean by the spiritual but not religious? Well, if you look at the statistics, John, guess what the fastest growing religious in quotation marks group is?
the spiritually incorrect podcast groupies.
I certainly wish that were true. Unfortunately, no. Our growth rate is it's not quite as attractive. We don't quite have the marketing appeal of the non-religious, right? The non-religious. If you look at the growth
The
statistics,
nuns.
the nuns, NONES, not none in not the habit,
I
wearing.
I
What?
saw someone did this a couple weeks ago. Someone was like, somebody said that the fastest growing movement in the world today is nuns, and I just couldn't believe that because I feel like people are leaving the nunneries, but nuns, those are the fastest growing religious group. And I got to explain that it means none, like those who have no religious affiliation. Do you have a religious affiliation? None. That's the
Yep,
fastest
none.
growing
You
group.
mark it on a government document. Religion, none. But what's funny is this has caused a lot of concern in Christians who say, "Oh no, they're all becoming agnostics and atheists and secularists and however you want to phrase it."
So we got to fight Richard Dawkins, they think.
Yeah, we'll fight Richard Dawkins and these sorts of things. But the problem is, if you actually do a poll of these, it's not what you think it is. The large majority of these nuns still hold to some form of religious or spiritual beliefs. You want to guess what percent of the nuns identify as atheists?
25, 30%?
7.
7?
7% of the nuns identify as atheists. Do you want to know what percent believe in God or a higher spirit?
80%.
72% believe in either a god or a higher spirit.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Now
They
let's
just don't affiliate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of those nuns, what percent do you think talk to God?
Oh gosh, that's
Talk to
got
this God.
50.
46.
46. Okay.
And 13% say God talks back.
30% say God
13.
talks back.
13.
13. Okay.
13. Yeah,
1, 3.
not
Okay.
quite that high.
Less, not that quite high. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. What percent do you think believes that there's a spiritual energy pervading physical objects?
Oh, I'm going to say 40.
47.
47. Okay.
What percent do you think believe in psychics?
33.
40.
40 believe in psychics among the nuns.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And they just overtook evangelicals as the largest religious group.
Yeah. So this really counters the narrative that like the more enlightened and scientific an age becomes, the less like religious they will be, and that's why people are leaving the faith. It's not because of rationalistic scientific skepticism. It's because of an anti-institutional, anti-traditional religion. We want a different type of spirituality.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
so here's the funny thing as well is there's actually a way to poll like number of religious or spiritual or paranormal beliefs, and people have done this is to try and see, is paranormal belief going away as we become a more scientific, or is it getting bigger? And according to a book called Paranormal America, the average number of paranormal paranormal beliefs in America will grow by 14% by 2050.
Stick that in your pipe and smoke it, Richard Dawkins.
It's growing. People are there's a fun saying that they relate in that book, which is the gods might go away, but ghosts and spirits take their place.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's always some reaching for something more than what appears to be. There's got to be something more.
Oh yeah. So like astrology. What percent do you think believe in astrology now?
Oh, that's got to be big. I even remember checking that as a kid. Sagittarius.
Yeah.
I don't check it anymore. But
it's not as big as you think, I don't think. It's 32%.
32. Yeah, okay. But I bet there's more that use it as like a personality diagnostic in the same way that they use Myers-Briggs, even if they don't believe
absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, people do that all the time, like Myers-Briggs or Enneagram and stuff. The Enneagram has some relationship to some of the stuff we're talking today. Not deeply like astrology, but anyway. What do you think about reincarnation? How many of the nuns believe in reincarnation?
40%.
38. You're very close.
38. Yeah.
Now, of everything that I've mentioned so far, talking to God, energy, psychics, astrology, reincarnation, what percent do you think of the nuns believe in at least one of those?
I would say that's very high, like 70%.
68%.
68%. Okay.
The vast majority, 7 out of 10 of the nuns believe in something paranormal, spiritual, that sort of stuff. You know,
I love it. Like I'm imagining like a reincarnation book, and on the cover it puts 7 out of 10 nuns agree, approve of this.
Well, what makes this even scarier is they took a poll, not of the nuns, of Gen Z. So that includes everyone. That includes Christians, Muslim, every part of Gen Z. What percent of Gen Z in total believes in reincarnation?
Let's see. I'm gonna say that's closer to 45.
40%.
40%.
The next generation, it might be a majority because you can actually see a straight line upward of belief. It might be the majority of the next generation after Gen Z, your kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's rapidly growing. And here's the thing. Some people might say
it might disappear, but it always comes back. And that's the beauty of reincarnation.
That's the beauty. You can't kill it. It just keeps coming back.
Yeah.
That was actually a good joke. I'm surprised.
Thank you. They've been known to happen once in a while.
So. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, John, Speaking of which, one of the ideas though is that this sort of belief only happens among the sort of non-intellectual people.
Mm.
So, yeah, these beliefs are growing, but it's dumb people.
It's only
That's
the dumbs. It's the
yeah,
dumb nuns.
the dumb nuns. Dumb
The
nun, dumb
duns. The
dumb nun.
duns.
Yep, the
Dum dun
duns.
dun 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 dun. Dun. Okay.
Dun dun. Oh gosh. So we really get off topic quick. Yeah, no, it's this. It's like, well, college education will fix that, right? The reason they're believing all these weird, spooky, non-scientific beliefs is because they're just not educated. Like the people who are educated know better, right? Turns out
Mm.
that's wrong. Those who have college degrees are 6% more likely to have one of those previous beliefs than the rest of the US.
Seriously.
Hmm?
So education does not, I mean, people have often said the more you educate a population, the less religious they will be. But it
The
is not the case. It's actually the opposite
well,
here.
not
They're
not
they're they're
religious.
they're rejecting institutional embodiments
Sure.
of that. So you could say they're rejecting religion, but it's not because of the spiritual claims of religion. It's because of the institutional elements of religion.
Hmm.
That's the issue, not the spiritual claims. It's the institutional element. The
Yep.
more educated you are, the more spiritual you're likely to be, but the less religious.
There is a direct correlation between education level and belief in psychics, ghosts, and get this, being a magician or a witch.
Like not just that those things exist, but that you personally are one
I
of them.
Yeah, so you want to go find a magician, you better luck going, to your local college campus in the insane asylum.
So what is there some sort of attempt to explain why that is the case? I mean, like a little bit of intelligence and education makes you skeptical, but more and more of it makes you come back around again.
I do think that that is part of the reason that there is an attempt. Well, I think the more educated you become, the less satisfied
Cert
you are in institutions. But there
Okay.
still is that spiritual yearning. You still want to believe in something deeper. You still want to believe in the enchanted cosmos, so to speak, that
Yeah.
there is more to the reality than just brute matter. And I also think that the more you learn, the less you feel confident that we actually know anything. There's this fun saying
Yeah.
that those who have bachelors believe they know everything. Those who have masters believe they know nothing. Those who have PhDs believe no one knows anything.
That is definitely the case. Like post PhD, I'm like, no one knows what the heck they're talking about. Like
Yep.
I have been to the mountaintop where the experts claim to live, and they have no idea what's going on.
Yep, and that's true. I will vouch for that, and a lot of academics will say this. The more specialized you become, the more you realize how little you know about the grand total of information. The better vantage point you have on your own ignorance, so to speak.
Yeah. Which doesn't mean therefore ghosts exist, but it definitely makes you more open to the possibility that hey, maybe they do, because who the hell knows, right?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. Yeah, you're more open to that. You're kind of like, yeah, I recognize how much human ignorance there is. You're
yeah,
less confident in these surefire answers when you recognize, oh, there's a lot of people on virtually every side of every issue. So you recognize how much and how little you've actually investigated these things.
yeah.
Yep. And you guess what the fastest growing true religion is in America?
Priests.
Priests? No.
Oh, sorry, nuns.
Get out of here. Religion. They're not.
Well,
It's
I was just
Wicca.
Wicca. Wicca's the fat weight by percentage, like relative to their current size.
Yeah, and so part of it is they are small, but even at their small size, it's really incredible. We talked about this on a previous episode when we did Wicca, but they started out in 1990. There was only 8,000 Wicca. There were only 8,000 Wiccans in the United States. By 2020, by the current year, the best estimate is that there's around 2 million.
Wow. They're
Yeah,
growing Wiccan smat.
wicked and smart. In 34 years, they've grown from 8,000 to 2 million. It's massively growing. There's over
Yeah.
40 billion views for things marked hashtag witch talk on TikTok. 40 billion, over 40 billion. Nuts.
You don't think that they're using witchcraft to get to expand to
No,
get
no, no.
bigger and expand.
Well, well,
Uh,
you don't think, do you? Well, 1/4 of Americans believe witches are real and they have real power. 1 in 4 Americans believe that. So
1 in 4.
maybe
Yeah,
1 in 4
that's
do.
interesting.
And that actually includes a lot of Christians. A lot of Christians think witches actually do exercise demonic powers. So they would actually be in that group.
Yeah.
But what's really funny though is there was actually a recent thing. There's a Reddit group with 750,000 members. It's called, I believe, Witchcraft versus Patriarchy.
Mm,
And there was a giant movement on there to hex Donald Trump.
wow.
To get him to where he wouldn't be elected. But the problem is, they said they kept running into barriers because Christians were praying for him, and that created a barrier. I kid you not. This is yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
so there you go. So there you go, guys. If you voted for Donald Trump and you prayed for him, good job. You protected him from the witches, apparently. So
Gosh.
yeah, so
Goodness.
that's just to sort of give you an idea of the growth of this. Now, who is this growing among? Because for some people, this is going to be quite shocking. But it is because a lot of this has been centralized among certain demographics. So, for instance, if you were to pick out one person to represent the spiritual but not religious movement, this current new age, as I sometimes call it, they're often white, they're often educated, and they're more often than not female.
Hmm.
That is the demographic that is most growing in. And some other typical things that you might find among them is some of them still actually identify with a certain religion. They'll mark themselves as not religious, but then when they get to the government document question of what religion are you, they'll say like Presbyterian. Can you talk for a sec?
I just muted myself so I could sneeze. But
Oh,
thank you for
gotcha.
drawing attention to it.
Well, you
No, you know
literally.
what? I won't mute myself. You and all the audience will have to listen to me sneeze now, and you're just gonna have to enjoy it. So 1 second.
It's only our YouTube audience will have to deal with this. So, other typical features of the spiritual but not religious, they find more spiritual edification in like music quite typically.
Hmm.
They're really big about music.
That's interesting. Very experiential.
Very experiential. They meditation is another one that's quite typical among them. They're not that some of them will pray. There's very little scripture reading, like holy texts. So what they consider sort of like how they express their religiosity is much more idiosyncratic. It's much more
Mhm.
individual. And I can actually talk about that. It's like, why is it this way? And quite often it's not, even though it's not religious, it'll incorporate other religious elements. And it's such as, like they'll pull in things from Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam and even aspects of Christianity. They'll try and fit it to themselves. There's this idea that I need a spirituality that communicates who I am, rather than an
Mm.
idea that I need a spirituality or religion that's true at like something out there in the world. Religion and spirituality become a means of self-expression, like a part of your individualized identity, how you build up an identity, rather than a mere like, oh, I believe in Christianity because in the same way I believe 2 + 2 = 4, just because it's true. Like that's like I just kind of have to accept that.
So I'm looking for a religion that fits into me, not I'm looking to fit into a religion.
Yeah, and this is true not just among people who are properly spiritual but not religious. This is even true, like even in the church itself, where there's really an idea of sort of making the religion about you. So a lot of people are incorporating other elements from the Christian tradition. So you might have Protestants who pray rosaries, or incorporate things from other people's faith. So a lot
Mm.
of Christians have kind of gotten on board with this idea of remixing the faith or syncretistically pulling things in. To the point that, you know what percent of self-identified Christians believe in reincarnation? I just wanted to figure this out.
27.
29, you're close.
Oh,
29%.
okay. I'm guessing pretty good here.
You
So
are. This is actually
I
surprising.
guess I must
didn't
have known the answers to these in a previous life.
or you're telepathic. That's another one we
Oh
could
my
talk about.
gosh.
That's
Wow.
true, yeah. Yeah, not quite perfectly telepathic, but you're close.
Yeah.
And it kind of give you an illustration of this, like people who want to pull in things from other religions. Let's take Buddhism. So, what percent of Americans are Buddhists? You have any idea of that?
Probably less than 3%.
It's about 1.
One.
1% or below.
Yeah.
What percent of Americans say that Buddhism has impacted their faith or their religion or their
Probably
lives?
explicitly say it. Maybe
Explicitly said it.
of Christians or Americans?
Americans.
30.
1 in 8.
1 in 8. Okay.
Yeah, you're off on that. But 1% are Buddhist, but 1 in 8, over 10% say Buddhism has affected their lives or their spirituality.
Yeah.
They're pulling things in from Buddhism, but they're not committing themselves to the actual religion themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what there's a Harvard divinity scholar, a couple of Harvard divinity scholars. They've called this the unbundling of religious practices and identity. Religious practices and identity, like meditation and stuff, or praying the rosary, or praying Muslim prayer beads, Hindu meditation, all this stuff. It's being unbundled from the actual faith that it is a part of, and help to make sense of it.
So
Because
they used to bundle it all together, and this is the package deal that you
Yeah.
accept. And you might not like all of it, but you buy the package and you deal with it.
Yeah, and that's why you sometimes have like non-religious, non-spiritual atheists who pray.
Yeah.
Atheists who pray, and they don't see any conflict in it. In fact, the really popular book, The Fault in Our Stars, has an example of that. She prays, but she says, I don't believe that you need to believe in God to pray. And that's just an expression right there, I think, of this emerging spirituality that thinks, this is about me. This isn't about anything out there. It's about me.
Well, is that a fair characterization? Might they not say that when you look within, you discover that which is true about yourself, and that which is true about yourself is also what is most true about the universe, because there's a correspondence between self and universe.
I think in more sophisticated versions, you could find that. But a lot of times, when you get to these people, their expression of spirituality, they don't think is normative or should be for everyone.
So it's not, they're not even claiming that which is most true about with me within is also a microcosm of what is without.
No,
They're just
it might
saying,
be.
this
Yeah.
is a matter of preferences. This
Yeah.
works for me. What works for you works for you. That's all that matters.
Yeah, that truth is a sort of pathless land, to quote one of the leaders of these movements named Krishnamurti. That you can find it for yourself. That you might go in and talk about your Christian faith, and they'll be actually authentically thrilled, saying, "I'm really glad you found that in Jesus. I have found it through this pathway." So that the spirituality becomes a means of self perfection, so to speak, a way of reaching the highest potential you could reach. And a lot of it actually comes from a movement called the human potentiality movement from a while back. And that's really worked its way in through as a through line through a lot of the understandings of the spiritual but not religious. There's very few things they share in common, because by its very nature it's idiosyncratic. It's you get to mix and match how you want. But one of the things that's driving it is this idea that spirituality is about reaching a higher potential for yourself, not about corresponding your beliefs to any sort of thing out there in the world. So, and one of the biggest ways that this has sort of been promoted is the contemporary love of self-help. The self-help industry is just enormous. I think and recently, a few years ago, they was declared that self-help apps that you can download. There's thousands released a year. And a few years back, it was declared the app trend of the year, self-help apps to help you sort of work through this. And the self-help industry itself is enormous. In 2013, which is the most recent stat I could find, it became an $11 billion industry. So it's just absolutely growing. And I think a good way to sort of summarize like just the sort of proliferation of this is I found a quote from a great work called Strange Rites by Tara Burton. This is what she says. The most successful new religions of 2020 and beyond are the ones that have taken an intuition, and found ways to make it both communal and in an increasingly brand-driven age saleable, so you can sell it. They're the ones that take the extinct consumer capitalistic culture of our age, smartphones, social media, moon juice, 4chan, oat milk, and make interacting with it into a sacred ritual, an avenue to fulfilling a wider purpose in a meaningful world. They're the ones that alchemize our everyday activities, eating, working out, following the news, posting on social media, and turn them into strange and sacred rites, not hobbies, but rituals. They're the ones that have figured out how to take Twitter, Instagram, or consumer culture and enchant it. There's that enchanted cosmos, that it gives meaning to the day-to-day life that we live and move and have our being within. That makes sense?
So it's like, okay, I'm in my office. I'm going to take a break, use my breathing meditation app. And
Yeah.
then I'm part of this like WhatsApp group that posts uh, daily, like there's no standardized thing. Anyone can just sort of post prayers or reflections or quotes, and it's from all different worldviews. And then that's sort of
Yeah.
like, um,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And so one of the things, go ahead.
And then I watch a yoga video on YouTube, and it's all just part of my day. And
Yeah, or you meditate 20 minutes in the morning and you can't go on your day without that meditation exercise. And meditation does have great benefits. So you see why this is so attractive. It does have
yeah,
good physiological effects quite often. You are reaching higher potentials through a lot of these practices. But quite often they're wrapped up in a sort of spirituality that comes from different sources. You take something that works and we know works, but then you explain it through certain spiritual means that kind of is contestable, but you take both together because that's the explanation that's been given to you.
what's this spiritual means that's contestable? What do you mean by that?
Okay, yeah. So one of the interesting things that I wanted to figure out recently is where these beliefs actually came from. Like, what is driving these beliefs? A lot of the like ideas about reincarnation. When did that get into the West and into our consciousness, and why is it so big now? And one of the things that I found out is the contemporary spiritual but not religious movements has its roots all the way back in the 1800s. And there's actually
Oh, so it isn't a bunch of individuals just sort of realizing their perfection today. They have a
no,
community and a tradition and the
yeah.
heritage.
There's a reason like things like meditation and yoga and karma and reincarnation and self-help, like a lot of these ideas, except for maybe self-help, come from the East.
Yeah.
A lot of these ideas come from the East, and they're very much filtered and purified of certain elements so that they can be westernized and sold. So
Hmm.
for instance, yoga, a lot of the yoga poses actually don't originate in the East. They actually come from Swedish gymnastics.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Uh,
most Eastern thing about a normal yoga class is saying namaste at the end.
mm.
Seriously. So, but some guy, 100 years ago when Eastern stuff was getting super big, basically just tried to market it as, "Hey, here's all these things," and they were just sweet. He just repackaged them and pretended they were part of um, this sort of yoga tradition. And of course, it's sold like crazy. People thought they were real. But of course, I mean,
Mm.
it's just Swedish gymnastics. That's why you can get strong from them. It worked for the Swedes. It'll work for you.
Are you telling me that that Chinese people don't have downward facing dogs? That's only in Sweden. Do they have
they,
downward facing dogs?
yeah, dogs and Chinese don't often get along.
Oh gosh.
Might have
Wow.
to edit that.
Yeah, jeez. Especially in the contemporary quiet. Seth is claiming that in Chinatown they're eating the dogs and the
They're
cats
eating
over
the
here.
dogs. They're eating the
Jeez,
cats.
Seth,
I'm
how
not claiming that.
insensitive in our current political climate.
I know. So there are three streams that I figured out. The first one is theosophy, which I know you and I have talked about. There was this big religious movement started by a group of people, most prominently Helena Blavatsky. Blavatsky was this Russian thinker who claimed to have gone and discovered in the Himalayan mountains this secret forgotten text that she translated, and that became her books Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, which when she came to Britain and to the United States, they sold these books and they became bestsellers because at the time, Britain was in the midst of an industrial revolution. There was a sort of loss of sacredness in culture. The church was very formalized and ritualistic. It really wasn't reaching the people super well, according to a lot of people. And India became a sort of place where the true preservation of religion was. It was a sort of for people who want to live in an enchanted sacred cosmos, but it's everything in their society is consumed by money and corporations, growing corporations and industry. India seemed like an oasis away from that. And
It's
so,
interesting because when I first became religious, the first month that I started taking religion seriously, I would go to an Indian buffet every single day and read scriptures while eating Indian buffet with the Indian music in the background. And it was 100% because the Indian connection made it feel more spiritual. That was
yes,
like, it was
we still
totally that.
believe
Like,
this.
and I'm just eating at an Indian buffet for like $9.95 or whatever, feeling spiritual because I'm eating Indian food.
we still look at the Indian culture as a place where this sort of divorce of religion and spirituality from the culture hasn't occurred. It was sort of preserved from that Western divorce. Whether
Yeah.
we consciously say it or not, India is that oasis of true integration of society with the spiritual, right? We still think that.
Yeah.
We absolutely still think that. But it comes from the fact that India was part of the British Empire.
Yeah. It was
And
it
so
was
they were
connected. We were hearing about it, but it was still other. It was
is a
still
distant
exotic.
land where you'd hear about it. You get imported goods all the time and stuff. And so you'd hear about this land where gurus had all these powers and people had, like deeper connections with the divine. So yeah, it spawned all this an entire industry of speculation
An
and people wanting to
industry.
discover. An industry, indeed, John. So you're
Yeah.
here for the jokes. I'm here for the information. So we work well together.
There we go.
So
And I
that's where
just go
what's
ahead.
up?
No, go ahead.
And that's where a lot of like ideas about reincarnation, spiritual evolution, conscious evolution, higher realms like the astral realm, vibrations come from. If you even say like terms like good vibe, you have good vibe that comes from that, right? Or like that's their, that's karma. They were the ones who really brought karma into the Western culture, and they were huge. They weren't big among the sort of lay people, but their biggest audience were like academics. Most famously, like Thomas Edison.
Hmm.
Thomas Edison got real interested in it. Alfred Russel Wallace, if you don't know who he is, he co-discovered the concept of natural selection with Darwin. He gave Darwin all the credit. He was a really humble guy, but this guy has as much claim to fame as Darwin does. And he was very much embedded in this. A lot of authors, a lot of screenwriters, a lot of people in the arts really took to this as well. They
Yeah.
liked the more spiritual view of reality, and it's a very complex system, and it still exists today, but a much reduced form. Now, that was one level of impact. Another was spiritualism. Spiritualism was it's not quite as a unified movement as theosophy, the Theosophical Society, but spiritualism is basically where seances came from and Ouija boards and the idea of trying to contact undead spirits. You done?
That wasn't me, Seth. That
Oh,
was
yeah. Speaking, I might as well just let them talk because the whole point of this was to get secret knowledge from these spirits, right? So it's
yeah.
like, oh, tell us the real world. They'd get around and the table would start spinning. So you had a lot of people a lot of professionals who took advantage of this yearning for a deeper spiritual world and the sort of dryness of the Christian religion at the time, the Anglican religion, fueled a lot of this. It's like, oh, let's contact the dead. And, let's see if they can tell us stuff. Let's get psychic readings and palm readings and stuff. So a lot of that mixed in. It's funny that the Theosophist hated the spiritualist, actually.
That's really interesting. Why wouldn't that have merged better?
The Theosophist hated the spiritualists because, according to Helena Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophical Society, they weren't contacting dead loved ones or higher spirits. They were contacting, without using the term demons. It was essentially they were contacting demons.
Evil spirits or
Yeah,
forces.
which is funny because that's what a lot of Christians would say too.
About the
Spiritualists.
spiritualist, or
Mhm.
also about the Theosophists. I mean, because
Theosoph-
they might
yeah,
say that Blavatsky wasn't contacting a monk in the mountains, but a demon.
yeah,
That would be a
yeah.
very traditional Christian response to that.
So Helena Blavatsky and later thinkers did, like Charles Leadbeater or Rudolf Steiner, did claim to contact these, but it wasn't through these practices, these seances. It sort of just came to them.
It was less creepy.
It
And
was
so
less creepy. It was literally like one day she said this man, Master Moria is his name, this ascended master, this person who lived on a different plane of existence. So at the time, at one point she said, no, he actually lived on Earth. Later on, Theosophists think they exist in a higher plane of existence. It basically contacted her and said, here, I'm going to give you this special knowledge on how to ascend spiritually to our level. There's different levels of existence, and the higher levels are helping the ones below. And we're at a pretty stinking low level, obviously.
So is there perhaps a difference between active and passive here, where spiritualists are actively trying to get these spiritual forces to the dead to come talk to us, like, hey, come do what we want you to do, and we're trying, there's a control aspect there, like we're going to summon you from beyond and bring you down here to answer our questions. And whereas the Theosophist is more like, I'm just going to live a spiritual life, and these forces contacted me.
Yeah,
And
and
so the
they will,
spiritualists are digging too greedily and too deep.
in that sense, yes. And also it's who are they contacting? Are they contacting dead loved ones, or are they contacting ascended masters? And the way you did that is usually by freeing the mind, allowing yourself to become a vessel for them to channel. Although some later theosophists didn't do that. So like Rudolf Steiner said, no, I won't go into a trance and channel. But others did, like Edgar Casey being the most famous channeler in America. He's known as America's prophet or America's sleeping prophet because he'd go into these trances. And then apparently he would be able to diagnose people with diseases up to 85%, to the point that like President Woodrow Wilson came to visit him. So
Wow.
again, real popular. So you have these two forces. You have spiritualism and you have theosophy. But there's a third one, which has been called New Thought, which is kind of funny because of the three, this one actually probably has the deepest roots in Christianity, strangely. Spiritualism kind of did because you can kind of see it in Emanuel Swedenborg, who claimed to be a Christian, started this sort of culty church movement.
Were you just trying to say Emanuel Swedenborg, and you just said
It's
it you pronounced it so correctly that
it's
Sweet
Swedenborg.
Swedenborg? Really? Okay.
Swedenborg. Yeah,
Well, I've
yeah.
been taught.
I looked this up. Before
I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to keep saying Swedenborg. All right,
it's
you go
not
ahead.
correct. It's not correct. So New Thought was started by a guy named Phineas Quimby. He's also in the 1800s, and he believed he discovered how Jesus healed the sick. And it was the power of positive thinking, as it would later be called. If you can think it and you focus on the positivity, you somehow draw that in. You somehow attract this to you. And this is where you would get ideas about manifestation and energy healing. And this worked its way in pretty sufficiently into the spiritual but not religious movements. And also, if you know what Christian Science is, this was the sort of font for Christian Science. And then you got later thinkers like the book The Power of Positive Thinking, another guy named Neville Goddard, who still has a huge following. And even in like, you don't necessarily need to look beyond mainstream Christianity to find this. The prosperity gospel, name it and claim it. Where does that come from?
Manifest your best self and your future.
Yeah, so you get that very much, especially on TikTok. Manifest. Like I taught this recently, and some of my students were sending me very funny videos making fun of manifestation, which is hilarious, right? You just manifest it by thinking about it. But with prosperity gospel, they give it a sort of even more theological gloss, which is, no, God has given us authority. This is a grace of God. If you name it and claim it, this is the authority given to you by Christ and stuff. Ask and it will be given to you, right? So it seems more theological. But at the same time, it's not deriving from scripture. It's deriving from the New Thought movement.
So these are sort of three tracks, right? You got theosophy, which is foreign and exotic feeling. You got spiritualism, which is creepy. And then you got New Thought, which is sort of happy vibes, occasionally with a more Christian spin.
Yep. And so you really got all these things rising up in the 19th century, theosophy being sort of the king movement. But eventually, through a scandal with that guy I mentioned earlier, Krishnamurti, it began to fall apart. But what rose up from there is a bunch of societies that spread quite rapidly. Theosophy was just one of them. Another one was called anthroposophy. Theosophy means the wisdom of God. Anthroposophy means the wisdom of man. And that one became much more of an intellectual tradition. It tried to appeal to academics, and it actually succeeded. Owen Barfield, one of the Inklings, the best friend of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, Barfield was a big part of Lewis's conversion story to Christianity. He was an anthroposophist. And he, in a sense, tried to Christianize it quite a bit.
Okay.
So, yeah, anthroposophy.
So Baptizing Blavatsky. That's a book title right there. Baptizing Blavatsky.
Not one I want to read.
Oh, come on. All right, keep going.
So yeah, then you have like Edgar Casey, who had the Association for Research and Enlightenment, and that's still a big group. Guy Ballard is another one that I know you're familiar with, who formed the I Am activity.
I am familiar.
I Am. Yes, he formed the I Am movement. He thought he was visited by one of these ascended masters from another dimension called the Count of Saint Germain, this immortal being. And it actually grew quite rapidly during the Great Depression. It had 1 million followers in 1938. And that's at a time when the entire U.S. population was about, 100 million. So
it's like
massive
1%.
movement. Yeah.
Yeah.
So very big. They weren't all American, but the vast majority were. And then, of course, Alice Bailey, who formed the Lucis Trust. It was called the Lucifer Trust, but they quickly changed that name. I wonder
Yeah.
why. She was kicked out of the Theosophical Society, so then she formed the Arcane School and this Lucis Trust. And she was actually the one who popularized the term New Age. She thought we were moving into this age of Aquarius. She contacted this ascended master who told her that we're moving into this new astrological age where enlightenment was going to happen everywhere. So it created this fervor. People were following, were spreading this idea that we're about to move into a much more peaceful, better age. And you can get post-war, post World War II, in the midst of the Cold War, when everyone's going to nuclear annihilate themselves, why this became super popular. No, we need to ascend in consciousness and get beyond our petty squabbles. And it appealed to people. And it's not just lay people. Like the Lucis Trust is now a publishing house for the UN, one of its recognized NGOs.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the UN has incorporated Lucis Trust. So, and this is one of many different ones, but really they all came together with the New Age movement. The New Age movement, there's a guy named Carlos Castaneda who in 1968, he was this researcher. He was this researcher at a university in California, and basically he said he met this guy named Don Juan, who gave him this traditional Aboriginal knowledge from the Native Americans. And he tried to bring that in, and a lot of it is very Eastern. It turns out Don Juan probably didn't exist, and he faked this entire PhD thesis that he was writing, but it became a book and bestseller. So, but there you go.
I didn't know that was an option. I can just summit a spirit being from an and. Damn.
Well, he didn't say he thought he was a real leader. Like he said he was a real. Yeah, no, he wasn't a spirit being. This is like Don Juan was a real person who trained him on Aboriginal knowledge. But Don Juan probably didn't exist, it turned out. He just made him up.
Wow.
And write a PhD thesis about it in a best-selling book. But that sparked, like, the New Age up to this point hadn't really incorporated Native American thought and this respect for Aboriginal knowledge, but now it starts doing that. And all this new stuff is getting added in. The new drug cultures from a guy named Ram Dass starts bringing some of that stuff in, this fascination with hallucinogenics. David Spangler, who was a theosophist, declared that the New Age had begun in the 1970s, and that really created a lot of spiritual fervor. But the big thing it was very anti-institutional. People had seen institutions fail over and over. This was on right before Watergate, and people were beginning to lose trust in institutions. So a lot of these societies weren't growing. What was happening instead is people were just adopting their beliefs and saying, I can do this individually.
Yeah.
So it became far more individual. And that's what really characterized the New Age, along with some other new emphases, like there was UFO cults forming, and a lot of other things like chakras became much bigger. But so it has a sort of its own feel and identity. But I don't think what defines it, which is like you adopt a certain set of beliefs. There was like a set of beliefs that you needed to be in order to properly be New Age. I don't think that lasted much past the year 2000.
And so now it is picking and choosing.
Yes, and that's kind of this fourth age with the rise of social media. Because no New Age ever came, especially after the end of the Cold War, the impetus for it kind of went away, and like all these claims of a New Age after 30 years, nothing really seemed to change. It kind of lost momentum. But a lot of the beliefs it made popular did not. When social media came around and new major proponents, some of them are actually even in things as popular as like Joe Rogan. You'll see him, especially like hallucinogenic drugs and some of the more spiritual aspects. It became super, super popular again. And I'm not blaming Joe Rogan particularly. I'm just using him as a sort of token example since he's the biggest podcast in the world. So it became super,
other than ours, of course.
Absolutely, yeah. We've had people on our podcast that have also been on the Joe Rogan podcast.
That's true. We had
Stephen Meyer.
Sorry, Stephen Meyer. We had Stephen Meyer on the show one week, and then the next week he was on Joe Rogan. That was our closest claim to fame. Is that we
will never ascend higher. We will never ascend higher. And so now it's even become, if it's possible to believe, even more individualized because it's no longer about a set of beliefs. It's you get to pick and choose.
Well, and as you're saying this, I mean, I'm thinking of the emphasis in perennial philosophy that. Yes, there might be all these different groups and movements and religions, but they're all tapping into an underlying unified idea that is perennial across the world's religions and philosophies. Some basic notions of a divine source that's both transcendent and immanent, close, that's infinitely beyond us, but also imminently close within us, and we're microcosms of a macrocosm.
Yeah.
And like there are some in this perennial philosophy movement, and I'm using the term perennial philosophy building off of Aldous Huxley's book, that would say, yes, we're bringing in all of these mixing and matchings of groups, but it's because underlying all the different religions and spiritual traditions is this one thing, that they're actually all saying the same thing once you take off the superficial covering.
Yeah.
And where's that in this story, Seth?
So a lot of that comes back to Helena Blavatsky. That's that. If you're going to locate that, that's going to be in Helena Blavatsky and Theosophy, because she thought she was recovering the religion behind all religions. She thought that these masters, ascended masters, had guided humanity for a long time, keeping this esoteric knowledge alive, this hidden knowledge. But every religion has an exoteric form, an outward form. That's like the Catholic
An
Church.
external,
An
exoteric.
external, yeah, an
Yeah.
external form to it. And that's like Christianity. And that's where they differ. But underneath them all is a common core that is hidden only for certain people who can actually grasp it.
Secret
And so that's,
knowledge.
yeah, the secret knowledge that's actually the foundation. And usually this is stuff that transcends the mind. It's sort of the mystical experience. So that's where a lot of it comes from. Aldous Huxley tried to excavate a lot of that in his book. Aldous Huxley is a major figure who wrote Brave New World, which is probably his best claim to fame. But he also believed in a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Now, perennialism itself,
Has a history. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because that is actually part of it. There's three streams of thought that contemporary spiritual but not religious draw from. And perennialism, I would put as a sort of hyper conservative sort of offspring of anthroposophy, very intellectual. It's actually like, I would put it in the same tradition where religious studies as a field of discipline came from. Perennialists, because if you look at Max Mueller, the founder of the religious studies, the entire field of religious studies, he was a theosophist, or he was inspired by theosophy. He never actually joined it, but he thought there was a common core to all religions. He got this from theosophy.
And if we can just academically study them and peel back the layers, we can see that they're saying the same things.
Yeah, but he also kind of kept a little bit of that Christian heritage as well. He thought that it was best expressed in Christianity, lo and behold. But he did think this. You see the impacts there of theosophy. There's actually a new book called Theosophy and the Study of Religion, just got released, I think, last year, which sort of reveals the deep interrelationship between the formation of the field of religious studies and theosophy. The motivation is to find a core of religions is what motivated the field of religious studies, to find the true religion behind the exoteric forms.
And did they succeed?
According to them, yes.
Yeah.
Now the question, what's up?
No, go ahead.
So the question of what that actually looks like, that's gonna differ.
Okay, so if they're differing about what's the universal esoteric form underneath all of the exoteric, have they actually found a perennial philosophy, or are they just once again coming up with diverse, disagreeing views of what the universal is? And so they're doing what everyone's done, which is saying, "Oh, we have the one truth."
Yeah, so that's the thing. So different people will give different answers. Because I think there's three, if I were to broadly say, there's three streams of the spiritual but not religious that exist today. And I say this as streams because streams weave together and they meld and stuff. And that's the very nature of dealing with people who like to sort of mix and match and
They
remix
erupt their banks. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? So no one individual fits into this, but there's three sources that you can generally categorize together. And they'll answer the question of what's the common core religion very differently. The first one is the biggest one. I call it the mystical tradition, which basically says the common core of all religions is the mystical experience. The mystical experience being, if you meditate long enough, do yoga long enough, or pray, you'll feel a sense of unity with the divine. It's called ego death in psychology. It's also what drugs can do. And that basically, it collapses the mind to the point where your sense of identity sort of disappears. It dissipates until you feel a sort of sense of oneness. And it's quite a joyous experience with all things.
And it's not a theoretical set of doctrines or beliefs. It's the mystical, unifying experience of oneness with the divine.
Yeah, it's beyond all thought. It's beyond all definition, right? As soon as you try to speak it into words, you lose something of it in that sense. And they think that's the common experience that motivates all religious faith. And so oftentimes they'll say the mind is the issue. This tradition will often say mind is the issue. You need to get beyond mind. And that's why meditation is so important about slowing the mind. And that's also why it's very Eastern, is some of the traditions in the East very much emphasize this. Mind has to be surpassed or stilled. And a lot of self-help books do that. They help you to live in the now, right? So Eckhart Tolle, one of the best-selling authors in the world, his most famous work is The Power of Now. Your mind puts you into the past, but the past doesn't exist. It starts worrying about the future. Past regrets and future worries, they don't exist. Live in the now. And what that's doing is shutting down the mind to just experience the present moment.
Stop thinking about things at a distance and enter in the immediacy and the flow of it.
And so, further works will say, so, stop classifying things, stop putting emotions towards things. Just let your emotions flow and let the mind go away. So this mystical tradition, what scholars have realized is though it is predominantly female, it is a predominantly female-led movement. The leadership of it quite often leans towards males. A lot of the major speakers in this, like Neil Donald Walsh, Eckhart Tolle, Deepak Chopra, they are men. And so some of them say, well, this is just a relic of patriarchy. This is why women keep gravitating towards this. But it is an interesting fact that it is mostly female movement. This is why, being the biggest tradition, the spiritual but not religious are more predominantly female. It's because this kind of it attracts female. And yet at the same time, there's still a male leadership component to it. It's quite interesting.
So they're trying to leave behind the institutions, the patriarchy of Christianity and the church, but a lot of these patterns are reincarnating in different forms in their new spiritual vision, and the institutions that inevitably end up coming with that, because the spiritual but not religious group is there's a lot of money there, and there is a lot of institutions that are going on. They're just new institutions.
Yes, there is a lot of money. And I think, I really kind of want to joke with this a little bit. I talked about there's like 3,000 new apps devoted to self-care per year. That it was the app trend of the year a few years ago. But I think this mystical tradition is sort of kind of jokingly best exemplified by Goop.
Goop, Paltrow. Yeah.
Gwyneth Paltrow's website. Do you know how much its net worth is?
What is it?
$250 million.
Wow.
She gets 1.4 million visitors per month.
Wow.
And you want to hear some of the great things you can buy there?
What?
How about psychic vampire repellent?
Okay, but you need that. I mean...
I'm not saying you don't. I'm just saying you can get it there.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Go ahead.
Well, this is something you might need, John, as well. So make sure you get this in a bundle order as a coffee enema.
Okay. That would wake me up, right?
Absolutely. Immediately.
Would...
Yeah. But you need some creamer for that, so you can get camel milk home delivery.
Well, to get you through the hump of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's your creamer, there's your coffee, you're ready to go, right? Make sure you put on your psychic vampire repellent, that coworker at work who just drains all your energy, right? And then there's but in case you need something, nice fresh scent, they do sell candles that actually make noises as they melt.
Okay, I've also heard that she sells a vagina scent candle. Does the vagina scent candle also make a noise when it melts? Because that combination of factors is you're going to cut this from the audio, aren't you?
I 100% am going to cut this. There are certain things that even I will not go toward, and that is definitely one of them, Jonathan.
It's true. She sells a vagina scented candle.
I know. You don't have to tell me. I'm the one who did the research.
Okay,
I know.
Well, it just brings a whole new definition to getting waxed.
Oh gosh. Okay.
This is staying
changing topics quickly. Yeah. So also, if you've heard about an aura, someone has a bad aura. This is where the beliefs in aura come from. They get this from the theosophical tradition as well. Your astral body or astral projections, or your etheric body or the mental body sometimes, and you're reading people's auras and stuff. That's really big as well. They also include like reincarnation and chakras, these energy vortices. You want to unclog your chakras, energy healings, alternative medicines, right? All of that is really being forwarded by them. Biggest movement, the one you're most likely to encounter.
Okay,
now,
go
ahead.
So, have you kind of given your historical overview of all of these movements coming together? Is there any other factor in the historical story that we need to be aware of?
Well, I'd like to say the two other streams as well, which is one is you brought up the perennialists,
Yeah.
right? The perennialists are part of what I call the intellectual esotericists, or just intellectual. They there's some that didn't like the emotion over the mind. The mind shouldn't be treated as an enemy. No, it's actually our gateway to the truth. And so this appealing to the intellectuals and the academics like Edison and uh, Wallace, that some of them kept that going, and they
Okay.
kind of split off.
Mm.
And some of those that they're going to follow Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy, and this is going to be like Owen Barfield, who appealed to
Mm.
Tolkien and Lewis, and it did impact their works. Like, let's
Yeah.
just be true. Max Mueller was part of this tradition, and you see it a lot today. There's an entire group called the Esalen Society, which kind of forwarded this ideas. So Gershom Scholem, one of the greatest Jewish scholars, Carl Jung got wrapped up in this. Carl Jung,
Mm.
the great psychologist, got really interested in a lot of this stuff, but he kept it very intellectual. He sort of stayed on the borders, and didn't ever. It was never about losing the mind. It's about probing the mind. The mind was never an enemy. It was a sort of gateway or a path.
It
And
too
it
must be incorporated into the journey. Yeah.
yeah. And then another guy named Joseph Campbell, who came up with the idea of the hero's journey,
Yeah.
which is absolutely huge. I know you like Community. Dan Harmon, he uses that idea through every single one of his episodes. Or Star Wars.
Yeah.
George Lucas wrote Star Wars in response to Joseph Campbell's stuff, who was working with some of these ideas.
Hmm. Okay, so you have this more intellectual, esoteric movement that's like, hey, we need to reincorporate mind. What
Yeah.
else is there? Go ahead.
And just as a last note, they would also say that this one true source of all religions is this mystical experience, but they're much bigger on the external form of it.
Yeah.
They like the form, the mental elements that add to that, so to
Would
speak.
would they say that the mental and the mind aspect it can help build a staircase to the mystical experience? Or would they say the mystical experience is also rational? And so you're it's not like you're transcending reason. Reason itself is bound up in the mystical in some way.
Yeah, they would say that you can always probe the unprobable, and that's a good thing.
Hmm.
There's this idea that giving intellectual meat to this isn't in some sense taking you away, but it's making it clearer. And so the more you get into this, the more aspects of the infinite you can bring into your mind.
And how can the infinite be rational without reducing it? Well, that's part of the mystery itself, because the mystical experience defies your rational expectations, but also encompasses reason at the same time. And it can do both, because it's overcoming that dualism of reason or not reason.
And in fact, we are fundamentally mental creatures at the same time.
Yeah.
So, like, bringing more of that into, like, probing into the depths of the unknowable beyond can in some sense, like, you have to somehow bring that down into intellectual form. And you're actually, like, using that. So, like, Jung talked about probing the subconscious and, like, bringing that forth and bringing it forth more. Like, he talks about the shadow and, like, bringing that out more fully. And the idea of that is that makes you more whole. The mind isn't the enemy. The goal is to get more of the mind out.
Bringing the subconscious to consciousness.
Yeah, so they reverse the direction. It's not away from the mind, it's through the mind.
Yeah.
Which is why they're much more intellectual, right?
Well, you talk about cosmic consciousness and the language of consciousness and elevating or evolving collective human consciousness. Those are very mental terms. They might be shed of some of what we normally think of as reason, but there's still mind looms large there.
Yeah, whereas in some of the other traditions, mind is to be surpassed. There's this idea that eventually you shed the encasing of your mental body.
Yeah. Would this tradition still say you have to leave behind your finite mental thoughts and embrace the infinite mind or the higher divine mind? So that it's a higher reason, but it's not irrational. It's true reason. Whereas your finite rationality is not true reason.
They would agree there is a sort of infinite that can never be reduced to the finite. But the only way we ever get to that is through the finite. We can experience it in the mystical experience, but we have to return to the world. The hero on the hero's journey always returns back to the world from whence he came.
As Plato returned to the cave.
Yes. As after conquering the divine and conquering the gods and getting into the infinite, they always go back, sometimes unwillingly, to where they came to offer, this beautiful gift to their culture to be either accepted or rejected.
Hmm.
And
I
that
mean,
requires
that's
a death to the self, this ego death, which is sometimes literal in these myths and these stories.
hmm. All right, so you've now covered four streams. Theosophy, which is kind of foreign and exotic, spiritualism, which is kind of creepy and summoning the dead, New Thought, which is kind of positivistic, happy vibes, sort of Christian, and then the intellectual esotericists, which are trying to reincorporate mind.
Not
What
quite. No, so I think that's not quite. So I want to say they came from three traditions, but now there's three streams, right?
three streams out of the three traditions?
Yes.
So Theosophy, spiritualism, and New Thought are three streams that come together and merge, but then they
Yes.
separate again.
Yes.
When did they merge? In the New Age movement in the
There's
60s,
no
70s, 80s,
yeah.
somewhere
There's
in there, but now they're branching out again. And one of those branching outs is the intellectual esotericists.
Yes, and the other one is the mystical tradition that I talked about with Goop.
With Goop. Okay.
Yeah, that's the mystical, the emotion over mind, right? This is now mind with emotion, right?
Okay.
Yeah, emotion getting beyond the mind. That's the mystical. That's the modern stream. This is where I'm talking about they sort of flow into one another. Theosophy, spiritualism, and New Thought, they kept to their own turf back in the day. You don't have a lot of people who call themselves New Thought today, but you do have a lot of people who incorporate New Thought. You don't have a lot of people who call themselves Theosophists today, but you have a lot of people who incorporate Theosophy. That makes sense?
Yes. Okay. That makes
But
sense.
are there modern, because it's all remixed and everyone's doing individual things, are there broad categories of like groups or ideas that they're pulling from? And that's what I'm giving you now. These are not defined categories. They're sort of loose traditions that exist right now.
Okay. Well, you said there's two more, and then we covered intellectual esotericists. What's the second?
The third, right? Because there's
The
mysticism, intellectual esotericism, and the final one is magic or neo-pagan.
Ooh. Okay, let's
Yeah.
hear it.
So this is the fun one. This is a lot more fun. This is if you know like Wicca or Wiccans. That's going to be the most obvious example of this witchcraft, this modern revival of magicians, right? Again, it's like New Thought. It actually traces back to Christianity. This guy named Eliphas Levi. He was a Catholic priest in training who quit and basically said Christianity has forgotten its magical core. He thought that there was, here I'm going to use it, an esoteric core to Christianity that's been forgotten. And the Catholic Church was its exoteric, its outward expression. But really, it's about white magic and using magic to help people. And what's really interesting about him is he's actually like, as a guy who's trying to actually, preserve what he thought was original Christianity, he's the guy who popularized tarot cards.
Wow.
Yeah, he didn't invent them, but he did popularize them. The reason we have them today is because of him. He popularized them. He also invented the Baphomet, which we talked about in our Satanist episode.
The goat thing that Satanists use.
He made that.
Oh, okay.
He made that as an expression of kind of like the animalistic side of humanity. It's a goat because it's like, oh, we're humans, but we're also sinful. Let's not forget the fact that we're all goats. So it literally has a Christian image. I mean, obviously he's a weird Christian, but like I wouldn't call him in any sort of way an Orthodox Christian. But in the same way, this is a guy who was like motivated by what he called Christianity, and yet that's become the symbol of Satanism. And tarot cards have become sort of like iconic of a don't do that sort of thing. I just find that really fascinating.
Well, it's testifying to just the eclectic nature of the whole thing, where you're mixing and matching all these different traditions, and sometimes a group does that together, but also the individual can just mix and match and combine them and create totally new expressions. And the question is, are those expressions at all true to the original sources, or are they just basically appropriating them? And what, like, to appropriate Christian ideas into this, is that just like annihilating whatever those ideas actually meant within their original context, or are they bringing them out and making them better by combining them with the best of other traditions? I mean, that's the difficult question.
Yeah, it's 100%, right? So kind of moving on from LaVey, though, LaVey's actually not the biggest figure. It's actually another guy named Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley is incredibly famous. They did a ranking of the top 100 Britons of all time. He's a British guy. He was one of them. of all the British people in history, he's in the top 100, according to the BBC. And he's the one who really just got magic famous. Magic, and he actually spelled it with a K to distinguish it from magic with just the C. Magic with a CK versus a magic with just a C. Because he wanted to say, this isn't stage magic, this is real magic.
Yeah.
This is real. And so he had all these rituals and very much rejected Christianity. He grew up in a sort of harsh fundamentalist home, so he really hated Christianity. So he very much wanted to incorporate black magic and formed a society that called Thelema, which means will in Greek. The idea was to do as you will, and this is where sex magic came in. And yeah, and
because what we will is sex. We will it.
Kind of.
I will it.
It's one of the deepest desires that we authentically have. It's not a fake external desire. It's a real deep part of our desire. And he hated Christianity so much, like he would make these provocative responses. Like he once was asked, "Who is your God?" and he would just say Satan. And he once referred to himself as the Beast 666, just in case the Beast wasn't obvious enough. He threw in the 666,
provocateur,
right?
Yeah.
A provocateur, right?
Yeah.
So that became a sort of foundation for another guy named Gerald Gardner, and Wiccans and modern day magic draws a lot from Aleister Crowley. In fact, even after I taught this once, one of my students walked up to me and they said, "Oh, I didn't realize I had a friend who named their cat Alistair after Aleister Crowley, and I had no idea who that was." I'm like, there you go.
Oh, gosh.
But along with that, not everything comes from that. Wicca does, but they're now, along with that, there's, the revival of Druidry, the Celtic religion, especially over in the UK. A lot of environmentalists like this. And heathenry, which is, I didn't invent that term, heathenry, but that's going to be people who are interested in, the Norse gods and, actually, think they're real or find some sort of value in that. So yeah, and that's the third tradition, and that is your up-to-date. I know we weaved our way through 3 prior movements that weave now into 3 contemporary traditions that people mix and match, and they don't fit perfectly in, but not a lot of the time, but that's it.
Well, I mean, this is an excellent background and history of, and, big picture. I feel like we almost need to make this a 2-parter, and the next episode, we actually get into what are these ideas? Do they work with Christianity? Can Christians accept some of this? Do we have to reject some of it? I think this should be a 2-parter. You've given us the foundations to then actually have the discussion with some historical context. So let's do it.
We might make that a Patreon exclusive. What do you think about that?
2-parter!
$5 a month. You'll be able to get that. Thanks again for listening to the Spiritually Incorrect podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to like and subscribe below, or to check us out on Spotify. And if you want to hear more from this week's episode or guest, our Patreon account has exclusive unaired content, often featuring up to an hour of additional footage and interviews for each episode. We save some of the most controversial and pulse-pounding topics just for our Patreon members. Members get access to that, plus a chance to meet monthly with Jonathan and I, suggest episode topics, join us live for an episode to ask the special guests questions, or even get a personalized episode custom made just for you. Check out our Patreon link in the description below. And don't forget to check out our official website at spirituallyincorrectpodcast.com to see what else you're missing out on. Sound effects from Zapsplat.com. Special thanks to Jordan Birch, whose song Starry Night provides the intro and outro for this podcast. You can hear more of his music on YouTube or Spotify.